The billionaire tried to resist. Until one night changed everything. Fire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. At exactly 2:17 in the morning, the private recovery suite is dim, quiet except for the steady electronic breathing of machines that never sleep. And Julian Crow lies awake, staring at the ceiling as if it might crack under the weight of his thoughts. He owns half the city beneath those windows, yet in this room, he owns nothing, not even the certainty of his own pulse. The monitors glow soft green and blue, reflecting faintly against the glass, and every number they display feels like a reminder that control, the thing he built his empire on, has abandoned him tonight. The door opens without drama, no rush, no urgency, just the quiet certainty of someone who belongs in the dark. Elena Moore steps inside, her shoes barely making a sound against the floor, her presence announced only by the subtle change in the air. She checks the chart, adjusts a dial by a fraction of an inch, and waits, because she has learned that waiting is sometimes the most important part of care. Julian turns his face away before she can meet his eyes. He always does. You can leave the meds on the table, he says, his voice calm, distant, practiced. I don't need anyone hovering. Elena does not argue. She sets the medication down, but she does not leave. Instead, she moves the chair a little closer to the bed, not close enough to invade, just close enough to stay. I'm not here to hover, Mr. Crow, she says softly. I'm here because nights like this are harder. He exhales through his nose, a sound that might almost be a laugh if it didn't carry so much exhaustion. You don't know anything about my nights. She considers that, her eyes moving briefly to the heart monitor, to the slight irregularity in the rhythm, then back to him. I know your heart rate spikes after 2 a.m., she replies. I know your breathing changes when the rain starts. And I know you haven't slept more than 90 minutes straight since you were admitted. Silence stretches between them, thick but not hostile. Outside, rain taps against the window, each drop a tiny, relentless reminder of time passing. Julian's jaw tightens. You're very observant, he says. It's part of the job. No, she answers gently. It's part of paying attention. He closes his eyes, not to rest, but to shut her out. He has rules for this place. Rules he recites to every nurse, every specialist, every person assigned to keep him alive. No personal questions. No unnecessary touch. No one stays past 1 a.m. Those rules have protected him so far, kept the past at a manageable distance. Elena knows the rules. She also knows that tonight, something is different. The storm outside is growing louder, the wind pushing harder against the glass, and Julian's fingers twitch against the sheet, as if his body is bracing for something his mind refuses to name. She reaches for the small clock on the bedside table, an old analog piece that looks strangely out of place among the sleek equipment, and turns it slightly so the face is visible to him. She does not ask why he keeps it there. She never has. I'll be quiet, she says. You don't have to talk. His eyes open again, just a fraction, and for a moment the mask slips. Beneath the billionaire, beneath the steel and discipline, there is a man who is very tired of being alone with his memories. The machine beeps, steady but insistent, and in that sound, in the shared silence of the room, the night settles in, waiting to see whether resistance can really last until morning. The night does not end when Elena pulls the chair closer, because for Julian Crow the night never really ends. When she leaves just before dawn, quietly, respectfully, he lies awake long after the monitors dim their glow, replaying the sound of her voice in his head. By morning, the rules return. They always do. Julian built his life on rules. They are clean, efficient, and they keep things from falling apart. By 8:30 a.m., the suite is flooded with controlled light. Doctors arrive with clipped tones and confident smiles. And Julian is once again the man who asks precise questions and expects precise answers. When Elena returns for her shift that evening, he does not look at her at first. He speaks before she can. We need to establish boundaries, he says, his voice steady, impersonal. Last night went too far. Elena does not flinch. She sets her bag down, checks his vitals, and nods once. Of course, she replies. Tell me what you need. That answer unsettles him more than defiance ever could. He lists the rules the way he always does, like items in a contract. No personal conversation. No unnecessary physical contact. No staying past 1 in the morning. She listens without interrupting, her face calm, her hands steady. When he finishes, she says quietly, I understand. And she means it. What Julian does not say, what he never says, is why the rules exist at all. He does not talk about the other hospital, the one that smelled of antiseptic and fear, where he sat in a plastic chair counting the seconds between heartbeats that were not his own. He does not talk about the woman who smiled at him through pain, who trusted him to make the right decisions, who squeezed his hand just before everything went wrong. He does not talk about the moment the machines went silent, about how the world seemed to pause, then continue without her. He learned something that day. Caring was dangerous. Staying was lethal. Elena senses the weight of what he does not say. She sees it in the way his shoulders tense when she adjusts the blanket, in the way his breathing changes when the room grows quiet. She keeps her distance, respects every boundary, but she does not withdraw. She does her work with the same quiet consistency, returning the room to order each night, aligning the small analog clock so it faces him, replacing the glass of water even if it is untouched. Julian notices everything. He always has. He notices that his heart rate settles faster when she is in the room, even when they do not speak. He notices that the storm outside feels less threatening when someone else is awake with him. He hates himself for noticing. Midway through the week, his brother Victor arrives unannounced, polished and sharp, bringing the outside world with him. Victor smiles too easily at Elena, his eyes assessing, calculating. Later, when she steps out to retrieve supplies, Victor leans closer to Julian's bed. You are getting attached, he says softly. That is not wise. Julian bristles, though he cannot say why. She is doing her job, he replies. Victor's smile thins. Jobs end, he says, especially when people forget their place. When Elena returns, Julian says nothing about the exchange. He keeps his distance, his tone cooler, his words clipped. She feels the shift immediately. Something has changed, and she does not know why. Still, she stays. That night, just before 1 a.m., Julian speaks again, his voice low, almost reluctant. You do not have to come back tomorrow, he says. I will request someone else. The words hang between them, sharp and final. Elena looks at him then, really looks at him, and sees not a billionaire issuing a dismissal, but a man bracing for loss before it can arrive. If that is what you want, she says gently, I will respect it. She pauses, then adds, but for what it is worth, I am not here because I have to be. She leaves on time, just as the rules demand. Julian stares at the door long after it closes, his chest tight, the monitors beginning their quiet warning rhythm. Outside, thunder rolls in the distance, and for the first time since he made his rules, Julian wonders what will happen if he keeps pushing away the very thing that is keeping him alive. By the third night after Victor's visit, the suite has settled into a rhythm that feels almost intentional, as if the room itself has learned how to breathe around Julian Crow. Elena returns without announcement, the same quiet entrance, the same measured pace, and Julian notices before he wants to. He tells himself it is habit, nothing more, the body recognizing routine the way it recognizes pain. She checks the monitors first, always in the same order, adjusting the intravenous drip by a hair, smoothing the edge of the sheet where it has creased near his wrist. She speaks less now, honoring the distance he asked for, but she does not rush, and that alone steadies something inside him. He watches her hands move with careful precision, and an old thought surfaces uninvited, sharp as glass, about another set of hands in another room, moving too fast, shaking just enough to matter. He pushes it away and focuses on the present, on the soft tick of the analog clock as Elena turns it slightly, aligning it so the numbers face him clearly. He never told her why it mattered, but every night she places it the same way, as if she understands that some objects are anchors. You do not have to do that, he says quietly, meaning the clock, the chair, the way she lingers. Elena looks up, meeting his eyes without challenge. I know, she replies, but it helps. He does not ask who it helps, because he already knows. Over the next few evenings, The routine deepens, subtle and deliberate. Elena begins counting backward under her breath when his breathing grows uneven, her voice low enough to blend with the hum of the machines. She times his medication so the drowsiness arrives gently, not like a wave, but like a tide. Julian pretends not to listen, yet his body responds before his mind can object. His heart rate settles faster. The tightness in his chest loosens sooner. He hates that something so simple can reach him when nothing else has. One night, as rain streaks the window in thin silver lines, he asks without looking at her, "Why nights?" The question surprises them both. Elena pauses, then answers honestly. Because nights are when people stop pretending they are fine. He considers that, the truth of it landing heavier than expected. He does not tell her that nights are when he hears the flat line again, when the silence after it roars louder than any storm. Instead, he nods once, a small concession that feels dangerous. The clock ticks. The rain continues. Time moves, slower but steadier. A few days later, Victor calls, his voice smooth and concerned, asking about recovery timelines and public appearances. Julian listens, answers, ends the call quickly. When Elena returns, he says, "You should not get involved." She understands without explanation. "I am not involved," she says. "I am present." The distinction matters more than he wants it to. Later that night, exhaustion finally pulls at him, and for the first time since his admission, Julian drifts into sleep without fighting it. He dreams, not of hospitals or loss, but of standing in a quiet place where nothing demands anything from him. He wakes an hour later, disoriented, his heart racing, the old panic clawing its way back. Before he can call out, Elena is there, not touching him, just close enough. "Breathe with me," she says softly, counting again, steady and patient. He follows without thinking, and the panic recedes, leaving behind a fragile calm. When his breathing evens out, he realizes his hand has shifted, inching closer to hers without permission. He pulls it back immediately, shame and relief colliding in his chest. Elena does not react. She simply continues counting until the moment passes. As she prepares to leave, Julian speaks, his voice quieter than it has ever been. "The last person who stayed," he says, stopping himself before the sentence can finish. Elena waits, giving him space to continue or retreat. He chooses retreat. "Never mind," he murmurs. She nods, accepting what he can give. "Good night, Mr. Crow," she says, and for the first time, the words sound less like a boundary and more like a promise. After she leaves, Julian lies awake, staring at the clock she set, realizing that something has shifted. The rules are still there, intact and unbroken, but beneath them, something else is growing quietly, something he has not yet named, something that feels like the beginning of a crack he cannot unsee. By the time the fourth week begins, the suite feels less like a place Julian Crow is confined to and more like a place that knows him. The air carries the same quiet hum each night. The lights dim at the same hour, and Elena Moore arrives with the same steady presence that neither rushes nor hesitates. Julian has stopped counting the minutes until she leaves, though he still pretends that nothing has changed. That evening, the rain does not come. Instead, a heavy stillness settles outside the windows, the city lights sharp and distant, reminding him of how far removed this room is from the life he once controlled. Elena notices the tension before the monitors do. His breathing is shallow, his jaw set, his fingers restless against the sheet. She completes her checks without comment, then sits in the chair beside the bed, close enough to be felt but not touched. "Do you want me to count?" she asks quietly. He shakes his head. The refusal is automatic, defensive. Minutes pass. The clock ticks louder in the absence of rain, each second a small pressure building in his chest. Without warning, his breath catches. It is subtle at first, just a pause that stretches too long, then another. His heart rate spikes, the monitor responding with a sharp insistence that slices through the silence. Julian closes his eyes, trying to force control back into his body, but the familiar panic surges faster than he can stop it. Elena does not reach for him. Instead, she lowers herself to the floor, sitting where he can see her if he chooses. "I am here," she says softly. "You are not alone in this moment." He wants to tell her to leave. He wants to tell her that she is crossing a line he cannot afford to blur. But the words do not come. The pressure tightens, memories colliding with the present. and suddenly he is not in this room anymore. He is back in another hospital, brighter, louder, filled with voices that spoke in measured tones while his world collapsed. His breathing falters. Elena waits, giving him space to come back. "Look at me," she says gently, not a command but an invitation. His eyes open, unfocused at first, then finding her. Something in her expression, calm and unafraid, breaks through the panic just enough. "Breathe," she continues. "Slow. With me." She begins to count, her voice low and even, each number an anchor. He follows, unevenly at first, then steadier, the surge easing its grip. When his breathing finally slows, exhaustion crashes over him, heavy and unavoidable. The silence that follows feels different, charged but fragile. Julian swallows, his throat tight. "Do you know why I made the rules?" he asks suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena does not answer right away. "You can tell me," she says. "Or you can stop." He lets out a short, humorless breath. "Everyone I let close," he says, the words breaking through with quiet force, "dies." The confession hangs in the air, raw and unprotected. He keeps his eyes on the ceiling, unable to look at her as he continues. He speaks of loss without names, of choices that haunt him, of the moment he realized that love had become a liability he could not manage. He does not dramatize it. He does not soften it. He simply lets the truth exist between them. Elena listens without interruption, without trying to fix what cannot be fixed. When he finishes, she does not rush to reassure him. She remains where she is, grounded and present. "What happened was not because you cared," she says finally. "And closing yourself off will not change what already happened." Her words are gentle but firm, not an argument, just an offering. Julian feels something shift, a release he did not know he was holding back. His hand trembles against the sheet, and before he can stop himself, he reaches out, not grasping, just touching the edge of the chair beside her. Elena notices but does not comment. She stays still, allowing the contact without claiming it. After a moment, he withdraws his hand, the vulnerability too much to sustain. "You should go," he says, though the words lack their usual force. Elena nods, standing slowly. "I will be back tomorrow," she says, not as a promise he must accept, but as a statement of fact. As she leaves, Julian closes his eyes, his heart steady, his chest lighter than it has been in years. For the first time, the thought does not terrify him. Maybe letting someone stay does not mean losing them. Maybe it means surviving the night. The days after that confession feel different, quieter but heavier, as if something fragile has been placed between Julian Crow and the world, and everyone can sense it. His recovery numbers improve, the doctors are pleased, and the board schedules remote briefings again, but the calm inside the suite begins to fracture under outside pressure. Victor returns with polite concern and sharp timing, appearing just as Elena finishes an evening check. He watches her with a measured smile, noting the way Julian's heart rate settles when she speaks. Later, when Elena steps out, Victor leans closer to the bed and lowers his voice. He speaks about liability, about optics, about how personal attachments complicate narratives investors prefer clean. Julian listens, his jaw tightening, torn between the instinct to defend and the fear of revealing too much. When Elena returns, Victor is already gone, but the residue of the conversation lingers like a chill. Julian grows distant again, not cold, but restrained, careful with his words. He stops meeting her eyes for long. Elena notices immediately. She notices the way he answers with fewer syllables, the way he turns his face when she adjusts the blanket, the way the chair remains empty beside the bed. She tells herself it is temporary, that healing is not linear, yet something inside her aches with an unfamiliar weight. That night, she overhears two administrators whispering outside the suite, discussing staffing changes, mentioning her name alongside words like reassignment and precaution. Elena does not interrupt. She finishes her shift as usual, steady and professional, but when she enters the room for her final check, the silence feels sharper. "Is something wrong?" Julian asks quietly, sensing the shift even as he pretends not to. She hesitates, then shakes her head. "Nothing that needs your concern," she replies. The answer satisfies him too easily, and he hates himself for that. The next evening, Victor calls again, his tone smooth, suggesting a temporary change in care to ensure consistency. Julian says nothing definitive, only that he will consider it. When Elena arrives, she feels the tension before a word is spoken. Julian's vitals are stable, his posture guarded. She completes her tasks with the same care as always, but the space between them feels wider. Halfway through the shift, Victor appears at the door, this time not bothering to hide his intentions. "Elena," he says politely, "there has been a decision." He speaks of protocols and boundaries, of protecting Julian's progress. He thanks her for her service. The words land softly but cut deeply. Elena keeps her composure, nodding once. She does not look at Julian. She waits for him to speak, to say anything that might counter the dismissal. He does not. His silence is not agreement, but it sounds like it. That is what hurts most. When Victor leaves, the room feels emptier than it has in weeks. Elena finishes quietly, her movements precise but distant. At the door, she pauses. "I hope you continue to heal," she says, her voice even. Julian watches her go, his chest tightening too late. The door closes, and with it, something essential slips away. That night, the storm returns, sudden and violent, rain hammering the windows, thunder shaking the glass. Julian's breathing grows uneven, the familiar panic rising faster without her voice to anchor it. The monitor alarms, shrill and urgent. He presses the call button, expecting help, but the response is slower, unfamiliar. By the time a nurse arrives, the panic has already peaked, leaving him shaking and exhausted. In the quiet aftermath, Julian stares at the empty chair beside his bed, at the clock still aligned just so. He realizes then what his silence cost him. He thought resistance would protect him, that distance would keep loss at bay. Instead, it has brought him right back to the edge he feared most. Somewhere down the hall, Elena walks away from the suite, her steps steady despite the ache in her chest, unaware that behind her, Julian Crowe is finally understanding that surviving is not the same as living, and that the night is about to demand a choice neither of them can avoid. The night everything changes arrives without ceremony, carried in on a sudden spike in numbers that no one can explain away. Julian Crowe's fever rises fast, his skin burning, his pulse erratic, the monitors flashing warnings that feel louder than the storm outside. The nurse on duty moves efficiently, but without familiarity, following protocol, calling for medication that does not arrive quickly enough. Julian drifts in and out of awareness, the room blurring at the edges, memories bleeding into the present. He hears voices but cannot anchor them, feels hands but not comfort, and the panic that has stalked him for weeks returns with brutal force. Somewhere down the hall, Elena Moore is finishing paperwork for a reassignment she did not ask for, trying to steady her breathing when the alarm cuts through the quiet. She recognizes the room number instantly. Before she can stop herself, she is moving, her feet carrying her back to the place she was told to leave. When she enters the suite, the heat hits her first, then the sound of Julian's labored breathing. He is shaking, eyes unfocused, fighting for control that is no longer available to him. The nurse steps back when Elena takes in the scene, relief flickering across her face. Elena does not hesitate. She checks the monitors, confirms what she already knows, and reaches for the cool cloth without asking permission. "The medication needs time," she says calmly. "Right now, we manage the symptoms." Julian turns his head slightly at the sound of her voice, confusion giving way to something raw and unguarded. "You should not be here," he murmurs, the words weak but reflexive. Elena ignores them. She lowers the lights, adjusts the pillows, and sits on the edge of the bed, close enough that he can feel her presence. When his breathing grows more erratic, she breaks the rule they both know too well and takes his hand. His skin is hot, his grip weak but desperate, fingers tightening around hers as if she is the only solid thing left in the room. "Stay," he whispers, the words slipping out before he can stop it. It is not a command or a demand. It is a plea. Elena's throat tightens, but she does not pull away. "I am here," she says softly. "I am not going anywhere." She counts with him again, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, guiding his breath through the worst of it. The storm outside rages, thunder shaking the windows, rain lashing against the glass, but inside the suite, time narrows to the space between their hands and the rhythm they share. Julian drifts, half conscious, his defenses stripped away by fever and fear. In that fragile state, he speaks without armor. He talks about the night he lost everything, about the guilt he never learned to release, about the belief that loving someone means eventually watching them disappear. Elena listens, her grip firm, her presence unyielding. "You are still here," she tells him quietly. "And so am I." Hours pass. The fever begins to break, slowly, stubbornly, and Julian's breathing steadies under her guidance. When the doctor arrives, he finds Elena still there, hand in hand with the patient, exhaustion etched into her face. There are questions, protocols, raised eyebrows, but no one asks her to leave. By morning, the crisis has passed. Julian wakes to pale light filtering through the windows, his body weak but calm. Elena is still beside him, asleep in the chair, their hands no longer touching but close enough to bridge with a single movement. He watches her for a long moment, the weight of the night settling into something profound and irreversible. He tried to resist, to protect himself with silence and distance, but in the end, it was not strength that saved him. It was presence. As Elena stirs and opens her eyes, Julian speaks, his voice hoarse but clear. "I am done running," he says. She meets his gaze, understanding the cost of those words. Outside, the storm has passed, leaving the city washed and quiet, and inside the suite, something has shifted that cannot be undone, setting the stage for consequences neither of them can yet imagine. Morning brings clarity and consequences. Julian Crow wakes stronger, the fever gone, his mind sharp in a way it has not been for weeks, and with that clarity comes an unease he cannot ignore. Elena is there, not hovering, not retreating, simply present, checking his vitals with the same calm she always brings. Their eyes meet, and in that quiet exchange he understands that the night did not just save his body, it changed the terms of his life. By late morning, the room fills with measured voices and controlled smiles as administrators arrive, followed by Victor, impeccably dressed, carrying concern like a polished accessory. Victor congratulates the team on the recovery, praises protocol, then pivots smoothly to logistics, suggesting reviews and audits and temporary suspensions framed as prudence. Julian listens, saying little, watching the way Elena stiffens at the edges without interrupting. When Victor leaves, Julian asks for privacy. The door closes, and the suite settles back into its hum. "Why did you stay?" Julian asks quietly, the question simple but loaded with the weight of the night before. Elena considers him, choosing honesty over comfort. "Because leaving would have been easier," she says. "And healing is not supposed to be easy." The answer lands, steady and unyielding. Later that afternoon, a subtle discrepancy catches Julian's attention. The medication log from the nights before the crisis does not match the pharmacy record. It is small, technical, easy to miss, but Julian has built empires by noticing what others overlook. He asks for the files. He cross-checks times, dosages, authorizations. A pattern emerges, faint but undeniable. The irregularities point inward, toward access only Victor possesses. The realization is not explosive. It is cold. When Victor returns, Julian does not raise his voice. He asks questions. He waits. The truth surfaces the way it always does, through pressure and patience. Victor deflects, then reframes, then finally admits to adjustments made in the name of stability, arguing that a weakened Julian kept the board aligned and the company protected. "I did what was necessary," Victor says, his tone reasonable, almost kind. Julian looks at him, seeing not a brother but a risk he ignored for too long. "You decided my life was a variable," Julian replies, his voice steady. "That ends now." Security escorts Victor out, the fallout swift and contained, but the damage lingers in the air. When the room empties, Julian exhales, the cost of control finally acknowledged. He turns to Elena, whose expression holds concern without fear. "I should have spoken," he says, the admission quiet and complete. "My silence put you in danger." Elena does not absolve him immediately. She steps closer, meeting him at eye level. "Silence protects power," she says. "It does not protect people." He nods, accepting the truth without defense. That evening, the hospital administration returns with apologies and offers, suggesting a formal role for Elena to legitimize what everyone now understands she already is to his recovery. Julian listens, then asks for time. When they leave, he looks at Elena. I want you here, he says, careful, deliberate. But not because you saved me. She holds his gaze. Then why? Because you stayed when I was not easy to stay with, he answers. And because I choose you. The choice matters. It changes the air between them. Still, Elena hesitates, aware of the line that remains. Choosing me means choosing truth, she says. Even when it is uncomfortable. Julian nods. Especially then. Night settles again, calmer this time, the city lights soft beyond the glass. Julian reaches for the analog clock, turning it himself, aligning it just right. It is a small act, but it feels like a promise kept. As Elena prepares to leave, Julian speaks once more, the vulnerability no longer an emergency, but a decision. I tried to resist, he says quietly. I thought resistance was strength. He looks at her, steady now. I was wrong. Elena pauses, understanding that what comes next will not be simple, that healing never is. Outside the suite, the world shifts in response to choices made within it. And inside, the path forward opens, uncertain but honest, inviting them both to step into consequences that feel, for the first time, worth facing together. The days that follow are measured and deliberate, like careful steps taken after a fall. Julian Crow's recovery accelerates, his strength returning with a steadiness that surprises the staff, and with it comes a shift in how the hospital moves around him. Meetings happen outside the suite now, decisions filtered through him rather than imposed upon him, and the air carries a quiet acknowledgement that something fundamental has changed. Julian requests a new role be created, one that bridges care and ethics, one that formalizes the presence that saved his life. When the proposal reaches Elena Moore, she listens without interruption, hands folded, expression composed. When the administrator finishes, she shakes her head gently. I appreciate the trust, she says, but I cannot stay for a title. The room stills. Julian watches her closely, understanding before the words finish forming. Later, when they are alone, he asks her why. Elena does not look away. Because staying because you need me would be another form of dependence, she explains. And that is not healing. The truth of it lands without accusation. Julian nods, absorbing the boundary she has drawn, respecting it even as it costs him. That evening, he asks for the suite to be cleared early. The machines remain. The monitors continue their quiet vigil, but the doors close and the noise recedes. City lights shimmer beyond the windows, distant and soft, and for the first time, there is nothing scheduled, nothing demanded. Julian sits up, moving carefully, feeling the strength returning to his limbs, and turns to Elena. I am not asking you to stay because I need you, he says. I am asking because I choose you, even if you leave tomorrow. The distinction matters. Elena studies him, weighing the sincerity not in his words, but in the way he holds himself now, open, unguarded. Choosing means honesty, she reminds him. It means you do not hide behind control when things become difficult. I know, Julian replies. And I am ready to learn. Silence stretches, comfortable but charged, the kind that invites truth. Elena exhales slowly. Then hear this, she says. I cannot stay if I am your escape. I will stay only if I am your partner. Julian meets her gaze, steady. Then stay, he says softly. Not as my nurse. Not as my savior. As yourself. The words are not dramatic. They do not demand. They simply offer space. Elena feels the weight of the choice, the risk and the promise intertwined. She thinks of the nights she counted breaths, of the fear she felt walking away, of the line she refused to cross without consent on both sides. She nods once. I will stay, she says. But we move forward together. Relief does not rush Julian. Instead, something deeper settles, a calm born of alignment rather than rescue. He reaches for the small analog clock on the table, the object that quietly marked his nights, and places it in her hands. This kept me anchored, he says. I want you to have it. Elena closes her fingers around it, understanding the meaning beyond the gesture. Outside, the city hums, unaware of the quiet vow taking shape within the room. Later, as night deepens, Julian moves to the balcony, the air cool against his skin. Elena joins him, standing side by side, not touching, sharing the view. I spent years believing resistance was strength, Julian says quietly. I thought control would keep me safe. He turns to her. You taught me that presence is stronger. Elena smiles, small and sincere. And you taught me that choosing is braver than saving. They stand there, the distance between them no longer a defense but a choice, the future unfolding not with certainty, but with intention. Inside the suite, the lights dim automatically, the monitors steady and calm, bearing witness to a transformation that did not arrive loudly but endured. As they turn back inside, Julian pauses, his voice a whisper meant only for her. Whatever comes next, he says, we face it awake. Elena nods, feeling the pull of what they have built, aware that the story is not ending but opening, inviting the next chapter to begin. The final days unfold with a quiet certainty, the kind that does not announce itself but reshapes everything it touches. Julian Crowe is discharged under clear skies, his steps steady as he leaves the hospital that once felt like a battlefield and now feels like a threshold. Elena Moore walks beside him, not as a nurse assigned, not as a rescuer, but as a woman who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. The city greets them with its familiar noise and motion, yet something about it feels different, softer, as if Julian is seeing it for the first time without armor. Weeks later, his penthouse no longer feels like a fortress. The doors are open more often, the lights warmer, the silence less oppressive. Elena does not move in immediately. She keeps her apartment, her routines, her independence, and Julian respects that boundary because he understands now that love does not ask for surrender, it asks for presence. They build something slowly, evenings spent talking on the balcony, mornings shared without urgency, learning each other in the spaces between words. One night, as the city sleeps below them, Julian retrieves the small analog clock Elena kept. He sets it on the table between them, the ticking steady and familiar. This marked my nights when I was afraid to sleep, he says quietly. I wanted to mark our time now. Elena smiles, touched by the simplicity of the gesture. She does not rush to define what they are. She does not need to. The meaning is already there. Months pass, and Julian stands before his company, announcing changes that surprise everyone. He creates an ethics and care council, one that values human presence as much as performance, and he credits recovery not to strength alone, but to connection. He does not name Elena, but she hears herself in every word. On the night they celebrate quietly at home, Julian does not kneel. He does not present a ring or an audience. Instead, he meets Elena at the balcony door, city lights reflecting in his eyes, and speaks with the same honesty that saved him. I tried to resist because I thought love would cost me everything, he says. But it gave me myself back. He pauses, then adds, stay with me. Not forever as a promise, but every day as a choice. Elena considers him, the man who learned to breathe again, the man who chose truth over fear. She answers with a nod, her voice soft. I am already here. The surprise comes quietly, the way all true changes do. Weeks later, Elena receives a letter from the hospital, not an offer, not an obligation, but a thank you from patients she never met, from families who felt seen because care became the standard again. She realizes then that healing does not end with one life. It echoes. The final image is simple. Julian and Elena walking through the city at night, hands brushing, not clinging, moving forward without rushing. The clock ticks in Julian's pocket, no longer a reminder of fear, but of time shared. This story reminds us that real strength is not found in resisting connection, but in allowing ourselves to be present when it matters most. Healing begins when we stop running from pain and choose to face it with honesty, kindness, and courage. If this story touched you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that love does not arrive loudly. It stays quietly. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life, and we are grateful you spent this time with us.